I never thought you'd open that box. It had been sitting there for decades, in the attic, tucked away between old blankets and framed pictures whose glass had long since cracked. To you, it must have looked like nothing more than another relic of a forgotten life. To me, it was the one thing I prayed would stay hidden. I remember the day I boarded that train in 1942. The station was crowded with boys just like me. Fresh uniforms, polished boots, faces that still looked more like high school yearbooks than soldiers. Mothers cried, fathers shook hands too firmly, pretending their hearts weren't breaking. I promised myself something as the whistle blew and the countryside started rolling past the window. I would write every day. I didn't know if I would live through the war, but I knew I needed my words to survive me, and I kept that promise. I wrote from Italy, where the mud clung to us like a second skin. I wrote from Scotland, where the winds cut sharper than any blade. I wrote from France, where the days blurred together, each one echoing with the same thunder of shells. I wrote under candlelight, on the edge of cots, in foxholes, with trembling hands that sometimes left smudges of dirt or blood on the page. But I never mailed a single letter. Why? Maybe it was fear. Maybe shame, maybe the weight of silence pressing down harder with each passing year. At first, I told myself I was protecting her, protecting Anna, from the man I was becoming out there. Later, I told myself no one would want to know. And eventually, the silence became so heavy, it felt safer than the truth. Now you know. You've seen the yellowed pages, the ink that faded but never disappeared. You've held the words I thought would remain buried with me, and you know they are all mine. Every "my dearest Anna" was mine. Every unfinished thought, every trembling line, every confession I never spoke aloud. They belong to me. Yet somehow now they belong to you too. Do you feel it, holding those pages? Do your fingers tremble the way mine did when I wrote them by the dim light of a lantern? Can you hear the rain on tin roofs, the gunfire echoing across valleys, the quiet sobs muffled into sleeves? Because those letters are not just paper, they are breaths, stolen from days when hope felt impossible. For years I believed they would stay locked away, that no one would ever read them. But the box has been opened, and with it, everything I tried to bury has come rushing back. So now I'll tell you everything, not as a soldier, not as the man who came home and wore silence like armor, but as someone who once loved, who once feared, who once wrote simply to remember he was alive. This isn't a story about heroism. It's a story about letters that never found their way, about love that slipped through my hands, about a secret I kept my entire life until this moment. If this story touches you the way it touched me to write it, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us keep sharing stories that inspire, move, and surprise. And now, prepare yourself, because what comes next will change everything. On the front, writing was survival. Without it, I would have drowned in the endless sameness of war, the mud, the fear, the counting of hours that felt like years. Writing was my way to breathe. My letters weren't meant to be read. They were lifelines thrown into the storm, reminders that I was more than a uniform and a rifle. I always began with the same words, "My dearest Anna." Even after I heard she'd married someone else, I still wrote it. Maybe it was easier to pretend she was waiting for me, that she'd open the mailbox one morning and find my words folded neatly inside. Maybe those 3 words were the only way I could keep a piece of myself alive. I wrote everything. I described how the smell of gun oil made me sick, how the leather straps of our packs cut into our shoulders until the skin broke, how the days blurred together like the same nightmare playing on repeat. But I didn't write for pity. I wrote so that I could feel something other than fear. I wrote so I wouldn't forget who I was before the war swallowed me whole. I told Anna about things I thought I'd never forget. The sound of cicadas back home in Ohio summers, the taste of cornbread at my mother's table, the way Anna's dress caught the wind when we walked by the river. Little things, ordinary things. But out there in the mud and smoke, those memories became sacred. Writing them down made them real again, even when everything around me screamed unreal. Do you know what it's like to write while men around you are dying? To grip a pencil with shaking hands while the ground trembles with artillery fire? Each sentence felt like defiance. Each letter was proof that I wasn't gone yet. Some nights I wrote by candlelight, stealing moments before exhaustion dragged me under. Other times I scribbled on scraps of paper during long marches, the words uneven from the jolt of the truck. The pages were stained with dirt, rain, sometimes blood. I could never tell if it was mine or someone else's, but they were still mine. Each word a heartbeat. I refused to surrender. I don't think I prayed much during the war. My faith had splintered somewhere between the foxholes and the funerals. But writing was its own kind of prayer. Not to God, not even to Anna anymore, but to myself. As long as I could write, I believed I could still come back from the darkness. There was one night in the Apennine Mountains I'll never forget. It was so cold I couldn't hold my rifle steady. My breath came out in sharp clouds that stung my throat. I thought I'd never see daylight, so I pulled out a piece of paper and wrote, "My dearest Anna, if tomorrow I'm gone, know that tonight I thought only of you," and somehow writing those words lit a fire in me. Not from blankets or rations, but from the fragile warmth of believing someone, somewhere, might one day know. And yet, I never sent them. Not one. Was it cowardice? Was I punishing myself for surviving when better men didn't? I still don't know. What I do know is that every filled page was a gasp of air in a world that tried to choke the life out of me. Other men gambled or drank or prayed in whispers that never ended. I wrote. That was my ritual. That was my rebellion. When the barracks went quiet and the men sank into restless sleep, I lit the stub of a candle and bent over the paper. Their snores became my background music, and in the stillness between explosions, I poured myself out one shaky line at a time. Sometimes I wonder, if someone had asked me then, "Why do you write if no one will ever read it?" What would I have said? Maybe I would have told them I wrote so I wouldn't die before death came for me. Maybe I would have said the words were the only thing the war couldn't strip away. Looking at those letters now, I see a map of my heart during those years. Some filled with rage, others with grief, others with longing so sharp it cut me open. Together they are more than memories. They are evidence of who I was when I feared I was already gone. So yes, on the front, writing was survival. It was breathing. Without it, I don't think I'd be here to tell you this story. I didn't find out from a letter. I found out from a buddy sitting in the mess hall with a tin cup of watery coffee in my hand. He leaned toward me like he was sharing a secret no one else should hear and said, "I heard Anna got married." Just like that. No warning, no mercy. At first, I thought it was a cruel joke. Soldiers had a way of teasing each other about the women back home. It was easier to laugh about something than to admit how much it mattered. But there was no smirk on his face, no glint of mischief in his eyes. He just lit a cigarette and stared off like he wished he hadn't said it at all. I don't remember finishing that cup of coffee. I only remember the sudden hollowness in my chest, as if someone had scooped out everything that kept me standing. That night, I burned 3 letters, watched the flames eat through the paper, curl the words into smoke that stung my eyes. They say fire cleanses, but all it left me with was ashes and a deeper silence. The rest of the letters, I couldn't destroy them. They were too much a part of me, too much proof of who I was before I heard those words. So I hid them, and yet I kept writing. Strange, isn't it? To keep writing to a woman who no longer belonged to me, who had built a life with someone else. But I think deep down, I wasn't writing to her anymore. I was writing to the version of myself that still needed her. I was writing to survive. I was writing for someone I couldn't name, someone who might one day find the words and understand. Maybe I was writing for you, though I couldn't have known it then. Still, I began every letter the same way. My dearest Anna, not because I thought she'd ever read them, but because those words had become my shield, like a ritual. As long as I wrote them, I wasn't just a soldier. I was still the boy who once stood by a riverbank, watching the wind catch her dress. Those words reminded me that I had a heart, even if it was breaking. The decision not to send them was a prison I built for myself. Every day, I carried the weight of words unsent, confessions sealed inside me. Silence was safer. Silence couldn't be rejected. Silence couldn't tell me she no longer cared. I carved a box for the letters, made it from scraps of wood and bent nails salvaged from broken crates on the battlefield. I sanded the edges smooth with a piece of stone until my fingers bled. I told myself it was just to protect the paper, but in truth, I was building a coffin for the part of me that still belonged to her. Why didn't I ever send them? Because I didn't want to intrude on her new life. I imagined her in a small house, maybe with children already, maybe cooking dinner while her husband came in from work. Where would my words fit into that? They would have been nothing but an unwelcome ghost, so I chose to haunt myself instead. But sometimes I let my mind wander. What if I had sent just one? What if she had opened an envelope and read my words by the light of a kitchen lamp? Would she have folded it carefully and hidden it away, keeping the secret close? Or would she have burned it the way I did, erasing me for good? I will never know. And maybe that's easier. The mystery was less painful than the certainty that my words no longer mattered to her. Over time, the letters changed. They stopped being messages to Anna. They became testimonies, records of a man who was trying to hold on to some scrap of his humanity. They became my proof that I could still love, even when love itself had been lost. Sometimes, when I look back, I wonder if I was writing for her at all. Maybe from the very beginning, I was writing for someone else. For someone who would one day open that box and see me for who I really was. Not the silence, not the mask I wore at home, but the truth. Every time I closed the lid of that wooden box, it felt like closing the lid on my own heart. And yet, I couldn't let it go. Couldn't destroy it. Because part of me hoped, secretly, desperately, that someday someone would open it. That someone would read those letters not as love notes to a woman long gone, but as fragments of a man who was too afraid to speak. That box became my secret, my burden, and strangely, my salvation. The war ended. Life moved forward, but the letters remained. Silent, waiting. Because they were the only proof that even in the middle of hell, I still knew how to write about love. I came back to the States in 1947. No parades, no brass bands or waving flags, just a train that screeched to a halt at the station in my hometown, the same station I had left from years before. I stepped off with one small duffel bag and the weight of everything I had tried so hard not to remember. People were moving around me, hugging, laughing, crying, but I felt like a ghost. The war wasn't over for me, not inside. It lived in my chest, in my hands, in the way I startled at the sound of a car backfiring. Everyone wanted to believe it was finished, but for me it had only changed shape. The first place I went was home. I don't know what I expected. Maybe my father waiting at the porch, pipe in his mouth, nodding in that way he did when words weren't enough. Maybe my mother in the kitchen, apron dusted with flour, smiling at me as though no time had passed. Instead, I opened the door to silence. My father had died while I was overseas. My mother had aged so much that when she first saw me, she squinted, as though trying to place the stranger standing in her doorway. I wanted to tell her everything, that I was alive, that I had carried her voice in my head through the worst of it, that I had thought of her with every step. But when I opened my mouth, the words lodged in my throat. She didn't ask, and I couldn't speak. That was the beginning of my long apprenticeship in silence. I found work as a typesetter at a small-town print shop. Funny, isn't it? A man who had written hundreds of letters he never mailed, spending his days arranging letters made of lead so other people's words could go out into the world. Each morning I slid the drawers of type open, running my fingers over the cold metal, and thought about how strange it was that their words could travel freely while mine remained locked in a wooden box upstairs. Not long after, I met a woman named Mary. She was kind, steady, the kind of person who could make a house feel like home just by standing in it. I married her. I tried to be a good husband, and in many ways I was. I worked hard. I was faithful. I was present at the dinner table, at church, at family picnics. But I never told her the truth. Not about Anna, not about the letters, not about the man I still was inside. Why? Because Mary deserved peace. She deserved a husband who belonged fully to her, not one divided between the life he had built and the life he had lost. So I buried the truth deeper. I put on the face of a man who had left the war behind, even when the war was still living inside me. When our children were born, I promised myself I would give them what I hadn't had, a father who stayed, who was dependable, who was there for every milestone. And I did. I read them bedtime stories. I taught them to ride their bikes. I cheered at ball games and clapped at school plays. To them, I was just Dad, steady, reliable, maybe a little quiet, but always there. But I never told them about the box. Never told them about the nights I couldn't sleep and went up to the attic just to touch those letters, to hold the paper between my fingers and remember who I used to be. They grew up without knowing that their father carried an entire life inside him that he had never spoken of. The truth is, silence became my inheritance, and theirs too. I passed it down without meaning to. They learned early not to ask about the war. If they tried, I gave them short answers. I served where I was sent. I did my duty, that was all. They stopped asking, and I let them believe there was nothing more to tell. But there was always more. Sometimes late at night I would take the box down from its hiding place. I would sit at my desk, open the lid, and sift through the pages. The smell of old paper and ink would rise up, carrying me back to the foxholes, to the barracks, to the riverbank, where I once held Anna's hand. I would trace the faded handwriting with my finger, whisper the words to myself as though reading a prayer. And in those moments I wasn't a husband or a father or a typesetter. I was just a man who had once been young and afraid and in love. That box was my secret, my sin, my salvation. I both hated it and needed it. Hated the way it reminded me of what I had lost, needed the way it anchored me to who I had been. Without it, I think I might have dissolved completely into the role I played for everyone else. There were times I wondered what would happen if Mary ever found it. If she were cleaning the attic one day and stumbled upon the box, what would she have said? Would she have asked me who I really was? Would I have been able to answer? Luckily, or unluckily, she never did. She lived her whole life beside me without knowing that I had written another woman's name more times than I could count. When she passed, I felt both grief and guilt. Grief for losing her, guilt for the silence I'd kept between us. But by then, it was too late. Too many years had gone by. The box remained closed. And so life went on, one day folding into another, the shop, the church, the backyard barbecues. Outwardly, I was just another veteran who had settled into the quiet rhythms of American life. Inwardly, I was still the boy writing by candlelight in a foreign land, filling pages no one would ever read. The legacy of the unspoken grew heavier with time, not just for me, but for my family. My children grew up knowing only fragments of me, the safe parts I chose to show. My grandchildren looked at me as a man who rarely raised his voice, who smiled softly but didn't share stories. They inherited my silence without ever knowing what it meant. I used to tell myself that keeping the truth locked away was the only way to protect them. But looking back now, I see the truth. The silence didn't protect anyone. It only walled me off, leaving them with half of a man. And yet, some small part of me must have wanted the silence broken. Why else keep the letters at all? Why keep them safe in that box, moving it from one attic to another each time we changed houses, making sure it was always hidden but never destroyed? Maybe I was waiting for someone to find them, waiting for someone who would read the words and not turn away, waiting for someone who would see not just the soldier or the father or the husband, but the man I really was. And that's the legacy of the unspoken. It doesn't disappear. It waits. You weren't looking for it. You were just rummaging through the attic, searching for old keepsakes, maybe an extra suitcase, maybe just curious about what generations had left behind. I heard your footsteps above me, the floorboards creaking with the same familiar groan I'd heard for years. My chest tightened even before you found it. Maybe I knew. Maybe some part of me always knew this day would come. When you came back down the stairs, you were carrying it. The box, my box, the one I had built in another lifetime, hammering bent nails into scraps of wood salvaged from a battlefield. I froze. I wanted to take it from your hands, to tell you it was nothing, just old junk not worth your attention. And when you asked, "Is this yours?" I lied. Said I didn't remember. Maybe it belonged to my father. I could hear the doubt in your silence. But you opened it anyway. The lid creaked like a door that hadn't been touched in decades. You lifted the first letter as though it might fall apart in your hands. The paper was yellowed, fragile, edges frayed. My words, written in the desperate scrawl of a much younger man, lay exposed in the light for the first time in nearly 80 years. And then you began to read. I can't describe what it felt like, hearing my own words spoken aloud after so many years of silence. My dearest Anna, the sound of her name carried on your voice cut through me like a blade. My heart pounded in my chest. Every instinct told me to stop you, to snatch the letters away and hide them again where they could never be found. But I didn't. Because when I looked at you, I saw tears in your eyes. And in that moment, I realized something. The silence wasn't protecting anyone anymore. Not me, not you, not even the memory of the woman I had once loved. So I let you keep reading. I sat beside you while you turned each page, while my younger self poured out his heart through your voice. Each line dragged me back to the foxholes, the barracks, the nights of cold rain hammering against tin roofs, back to Anna's face, forever frozen in youth, smiling at me as though nothing could touch us. It hurt, God, it hurt, to hear it all again, to relive it through you. But beneath the pain was something I hadn't felt in decades, peace, as though the words had finally found their way home, not to Anna, not to the fire I once feared they belonged in, but to you. There was a moment when you stopped, your eyes lifting from the page to meet mine. You asked softly, "Why didn't you ever tell us?" I didn't answer right away. My throat was tight, my chest heavy. Finally, I whispered, "Because I didn't know how." And that was the truth. I had never known how to turn the weight inside me into words anyone could bear to hear. It was easier to lock it away, to let the silence speak for me. But now the silence was gone. When you finished the last page, the room felt different. The air was thick with memory, yet lighter somehow. For the first time in my life, the burden wasn't mine alone. You closed the box gently, as though tucking the past back to sleep, but we both knew it was awake now, alive, and it could never be buried again. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my desk, the box open before me, letters spread out like fallen leaves. I touched the pages, tracing the faded lines of ink, and wondered why I had feared this moment for so long. For years, I believed the discovery of these letters would be my undoing, but instead, it felt like release. like a confession I hadn't known how to give, finally spoken out loud. Maybe this was always how it was meant to be. Maybe those letters were never really for Anna. Maybe all along they were for you, to show you who I was, not the mask I wore, not the silence I lived in, but the man beneath it all. For decades, I thought the war had stolen my voice, but I see now it didn't. It only locked my words away, waiting for someone brave enough to open the box and listen. And you did. The box sits on my desk now, not hidden away in the attic, not buried under blankets, not sealed in the dark. It sits in the open, the wood scarred and worn, the lid loose from years of waiting. For the first time, I can look at it without shame. For the first time, I see it not as a burden, but as a gift. Those letters, those fragile pages smudged with dirt, stained with time, are more than words. They are my life's testament. They are the map of a man who loved, who feared, who survived by writing what he could not say aloud. You told me you want to publish them. At first I hesitated. For so long I kept them hidden, convinced that no one could carry the weight of what they contained. But when I looked at you, when I saw the gentleness in your eyes, I knew the time had come. My silence had reached its end. I said yes, because I've come to understand that the letters aren't mine alone. They belong to every soldier who ever wrote words that never reached home. They belong to every heart that loved in silence. They belong to history, not just to me. And maybe, just maybe, someone will read them and feel less alone. Maybe a young person struggling with their own silence will see in those pages a reflection of themselves. Maybe a veteran who has never spoken of what they endured will recognize the unspoken and find comfort in knowing they are not the only one. I don't want to be remembered as a hero. I never was one. I didn't storm machine gun nests or earn medals for bravery. I was a scared kid who did his duty, who survived when others didn't. And survival doesn't make you a hero. It just makes you human, and that's all I want. To be remembered not as a symbol, not as a myth, but as a man who loved a woman he never got back. A man who built a family he never fully let inside his heart. A man who wrote letters in the dark because it was the only way to keep breathing. Thanks to you, my story doesn't end in silence. Thanks to you, the letters that never reached their destination will finally find their way into the world. They will travel farther than I ever imagined, into the hands and hearts of people I will never meet. And in that journey, I will live on. When I look at you now, I see something I've been searching for all my life, understanding. You don't judge me. You don't condemn me for the secrets I kept, for the silence I carried. You simply listen. And in that listening, you've given me the greatest gift, peace. Maybe that was the purpose all along. Maybe I kept those letters, not because I couldn't let go, but because I was waiting for someone who could hold them without fear, someone who could see me as I was. Not perfect, not heroic, but real. So thank you for opening the box, for reading the words, for giving me back the chance to be remembered, not as a hero, not as a soldier, but as a man. And that, I think, is enough. If this story touched you the way it touched me, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. We share new stories every day, real stories that move, inspire, and remind us what it means to be human.